The dealership was packed. Customers haggled, salesmen smiled fake smiles, and Malcolm? He was just another customer, or so they thought. He had barely stepped onto the lot when he heard it. Ugh, look at this one. Bet he's here to beg for a discount. Malcolm's hands clenched, but his face stayed calm. He wasn't just any customer. He owned this place. And the fool who just insulted him? Yeah, he was about to have the worst day of his life. Malcolm Grayson stepped into Grayson Auto Sales, blending into the crowd like any other customer. No fancy suit, no luxury watch, just a man in dark jeans and a sweater casually strolling through the lot. But here's the thing. He owned this place. No one recognized him. No one rushed to greet him. He liked it that way. It was the best way to see how his employees truly operated. He walked past a row of trucks, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the dealership floor. Some employees were polite, engaging customers with a genuine smile. Others? Just going through the motions, barely masking their disinterest. And then, there was Rick Marshall. Slick suit, perfectly styled hair, a practiced, confident smirk. Malcolm watched as Rick effortlessly charmed an older couple looking at a luxury sedan. His voice smooth, his posture welcoming. Then, a younger man in dusty work boots approached, inquiring about financing. Rick's entire demeanor shifted. Less enthusiasm, less respect. Malcolm caught it instantly. He exhaled slowly, keeping his expression neutral. Rick was one of his top-selling employees, but numbers did not tell the whole story. Malcolm moved toward the truck section, blending into the background. That was when he heard it. Rick's voice again. Different tone. Sharper. Disrespectful. Malcolm turned, and in that instant, he knew. This was the moment that would change everything. He adjusted his sweater, leaning against a black Ford F-150, pretending to inspect the sticker price. His ears stayed sharp, listening to the conversation unfolding just a few feet away. A black customer, a middle-aged man with a strong build and a worn leather jacket, was eyeing a brand-new Ford F-150. His fingers brushed the handle, admiration clear in his expression. Rick's voice cut through the showroom, low and condescending. "You sure you're in the right place? These trucks aren't exactly affordable for people like you." Silence. The customer, James Carter, froze, his expression tightening. Malcolm's jaw clenched, his hands curled into fists. James exhaled through his nose, forcing a polite smile. "I was just looking." Rick chuckled, shaking his head. "Sure." Looking. He turned to another salesman with a smirk. "Hey, maybe we should put up a just browsing sign, save some people the trouble." Laughter. Malcolm felt his blood boil. His name was on the deed to this building, and this was happening in his dealership? James nodded, jaw tight, and started to walk away. And that was when Malcolm spoke. Loud, clear, commanding. "Hold on a second." James stopped. So did Rick. All eyes turned to Malcolm. And in that moment, everything shifted. James Carter ran his hand over the polished surface of a brand-new Ford F-150, admiring its sleek design. It was the truck he had dreamed of owning for years. But before he could even picture himself behind the wheel, a voice cut through the air. "You sure you're in the right place? These trucks aren't exactly affordable for people like you." The words hit like a slap. James turned slowly, meeting the smirking face of Rick Marshall, the dealership's top salesman. Arrogant, smug. A man who believed he could read people at a glance. Rick didn't see a hard-working man who had spent years saving for this moment. He only saw his skin. James forced a breath through his nose, tightening his grip on his wallet. Rick chuckled under his breath, glancing toward his colleague. "Guess some people just like to window shop." Laughter. Malcolm Grayson stood a few feet away, eyes locked on the scene. His own dealership, his own employee. Saying this. His hands curled into fists, nails pressing into his palms. Unbelievable. James exhaled, straightening his shoulders. He had been here before. Different city, different faces, same script. He knew how this worked. If he reacted, he was the problem. If he let it go, they would feel justified. A slow sigh left his lips. He shook his head, muttering, "Forget it." He turned, shoulders tense, preparing to walk away. But then, "Hold on a second." The voice was calm, steady, but it held weight. Rick blinked, turning toward the man in the sweater who had been standing nearby. James stopped, confused. The dealership went silent. All eyes were on Malcolm Grayson. And in that moment, everything changed. Malcolm took a slow, deliberate step forward, stopping James in his tracks. "That truck, you like it?" His voice was calm, but there was something beneath it. A weight. A quiet authority. James hesitated, glancing between Malcolm and Rick. This was not how these situations usually went. "Yeah, but it's not in my budget." His words were cautious, as if waiting for another insult to land. But Malcolm just smirked. A smirk that held power. "Don't worry about that." The dealership fell silent. Rick crossed his arms, still oblivious, still cocky. "All right, man. What's your point?" he scoffed, glancing at his colleagues for backup. Malcolm's smirk didn't fade. "You work on commission, right?" Rick rolled his eyes. "Yeah. Why?" And then, Malcolm said the words that froze the entire room. "Because you just lost the biggest sale of your life." The silence was deafening. Rick frowned. "What?" Malcolm took another step forward, his posture shifting. No longer just another customer. "I was here to buy a truck today." His voice was sharper now. "In fact, I was planning on buying several." Rick blinked, his arrogance faltering. "But you just proved to me that this dealership has a problem." Murmurs rippled through the showroom. The other employees were shifting uncomfortably. The manager, who had been watching from a distance, was suddenly very interested. Rick let out a short, nervous laugh. "Look, man, I was just messing around." "Messing around?" Malcolm cut him off, his tone cold. "You humiliated a paying customer. Judged him before you even knew his name." Rick opened his mouth, then shut it. Because now, he finally saw it. The way people were looking at Malcolm. The whispers. The shift in the air. The power shift. Something was very, very wrong. And then, the manager stepped in. Malcolm ran his fingers across the smooth, polished hood of the Ford F-150, his gaze locked on Rick. "I want this one," he said, his tone casual. "Full price. No negotiations." Rick's smirk returned instantly, his confidence snapping back like a rubber band. "Great choice, sir," he said with enthusiasm, completely unaware of what was coming. "Let's get the paperwork started." He reached for his clipboard, but before he could turn, Malcolm lifted a hand. "Actually," Malcolm said, tilting his head slightly, "write it up in his name." He pointed at James. The air shifted. Rick's smile froze. "Wait, what?" A heavy silence crashed down on the dealership. Employees stopped what they were doing. Customers turned their heads. The entire showroom went quiet. Rick let out an awkward chuckle. "Sir, you heard me," Malcolm said, his voice sharpening like a blade. "You are selling this truck to him, full price, and you are getting your commission." Rick's jaw tightened, his eyes darting between Malcolm and James. But nothing," Malcolm interrupted, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "You said this truck was not for people like him. Now, you are going to sell it to him. Do we have a problem?" Rick swallowed hard. For the first time, he looked genuinely nervous. His arrogance was peeling away, layer by layer. "I just do not get it," he muttered. "Why would you?" Malcolm smirked. His eyes darkened. "Because I can." Then, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his sleek black leather ID, and handed it to Rick. Rick hesitated before grabbing it, his fingers suddenly shaky. His eyes skimmed the name once, then again. And then, his breath caught, his face drained of color. Malcolm Grayson, CEO of Grayson Auto Sales. His entire body went rigid. Gasps erupted around the showroom. Employees whispered furiously, their eyes darting between Malcolm and Rick. No way. That is the owner? Rick just insulted the CEO. Customers stared in shock. A few even pulled out their phones to record. Rick staggered back a step, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Sir, I did not realize. Malcolm took a slow step forward, his gaze locked on Rick like a predator sizing up its prey. You really thought you could judge people based on how they look? Rick had no words. His hands were shaking. His entire world was crumbling. And then, the dealership manager came rushing through the crowd, his face drenched in sweat. Mr. Grayson, he gasped. I did not know you were coming in today. He turned to Rick, pure panic in his eyes. What did you do? He hissed under his breath. Rick could not answer. He looked like he was going to be sick. Malcolm ignored both of them. Is this how you run my business? He asked, his tone making the entire room feel 10 degrees colder. The manager stammered. Sir, Malcolm lifted a hand. Silence. He turned back to Rick, his expression unreadable. I built this dealership from the ground up. I hired people who were supposed to represent my values. He took a step closer, voice lowering into a quiet, dangerous tone. And you? You failed. Rick's mouth opened, but no words came out. The customers, the employees, everyone was watching. You thought you could disrespect people who do not look like you. You thought no one would hold you accountable. Malcolm's voice was calm, yet lethal. But today? You learned something new. Rick looked like he wanted to disappear. Malcolm turned back to the manager. How long has he worked here? The manager hesitated. 3 years, sir. 3 years, Malcolm repeated. 3 years of discrimination that no one called out. The manager gulped. That ends today. Rick staggered. Sir, please. Malcolm did not even look at him. Pack your things. You are done here. The room gasped. Rick froze. Sir, you cannot. I can, Malcolm said, his tone final. And I just did. Rick's breath hitched. He turned to the manager in desperation. Please. The manager looked away. Rick was alone. His arrogance, gone. His career, over. Malcolm took one last look at him before turning to James. Congratulations on your new truck. James blinked in disbelief. I do not know what to say. Malcolm smiled. You do not have to say anything. Just enjoy it. And with that, he handed James the keys, turning toward the exit. The crowd parted for him, phones still recorded. Rick stood there, humiliated, destroyed, and unemployed. And as Malcolm walked out of the dealership, the last thing he heard was an employee whisper, Damn, he really messed with the wrong one. End. Malcolm's eyes never left Rick's face as he pulled out his leather wallet and smoothly slid his ID across the desk. Because I can. Rick hesitated for a second before picking it up. His fingers, once steady with arrogance, were now trembling. His eyes skimmed the text once, then again. And then his breath hitched. Malcolm Grayson, CEO of Grayson Auto Sales. Rick's entire body locked up. His jaw went slack, and a strange choking sound escaped his throat. The blood drained from his face so fast that he looked like he might pass out. Gasps erupted across the showroom. Wait, he is the owner? Someone whispered. Employees exchanged panicked glances. A few took nervous steps back, trying to distance themselves from Rick. Customers were frozen, eyes flicking between Rick and Malcolm like they were watching a bomb about to go off. Rick staggered backward, his legs suddenly unsteady. Mr. Grayson, I did not. Malcolm tilted his head slightly, studying him. You did not what, Rick? His voice was calm. Too calm. Rick swallowed, his face twisted in sheer panic. I did not realize who you were, sir. If I had known. Malcolm took a slow, deliberate step forward. So, if I had walked in wearing a suit and a Rolex, you would have treated me with respect. Rick visibly swallowed. Malcolm let out a short, humorless chuckle. You thought you could judge people based on how they look? Rick did not answer. He could not. The dealership manager sprinted through the showroom, sweating bullets. "Mr. Grayson!" He practically skidded to a stop in front of him, breathless. I did not know you were coming in today." He whipped around to Rick, eyes bulging. "What did you do?" he hissed under his breath. Rick looked like he was going to throw up. Malcolm did not even spare the manager a glance. "Is this how my business is run?" The manager paled. "Sir, Malcolm lifted a hand. Silence. His gaze locked back onto Rick, who looked smaller by the second. "I built this dealership from the ground up," Malcolm said, his voice smooth, controlled, yet deadly. "I hired people I trusted, people who were supposed to represent my values." He stepped even closer, his voice dropping to a razor-sharp whisper. "And you? You failed." Rick looked like he was about to collapse. The entire room was silent. Malcolm finally turned to the manager. "How long has he been working here?" The manager's throat bobbed. 3 years, sir." Malcolm let out a slow exhale. 3 years of discrimination," he muttered. 3 years of mistreating customers, and no one called it out. The manager opened his mouth, then shut it. Malcolm turned back to Rick. "That ends today." Rick visibly flinched. Sir, please." Malcolm did not blink. "Pack your things. You are done here." The room gasped. Rick froze. Sir, I swear." Malcolm's expression did not change. "I said, you are done." Rick whirled to the manager, desperate. "Please, The manager refused to look at him. Rick was alone. His confidence, gone. His arrogance, destroyed. His job, over. And Malcolm, he never even raised his voice. Just before turning away, Malcolm let out a soft chuckle. "Not so fun when you are the one being judged, is it?" Rick had no answer, because there was nothing left to say. The dealership was dead silent. No one dared to move. The weight of Malcolm Grayson's words hung heavy in the air. Rick's entire body stiffened, his face frozen in pure disbelief. The manager, Mr. Thompson, wiped the sweat off his brow, forcing an uneasy smile. "Sir, I had no idea you were here," he said, his voice trembling. Malcolm's eyes darkened. "And that is the problem," he said flatly. Mr. Thompson's smile vanished. Malcolm took a slow step toward Rick, his eyes piercing through him. "How many other customers have you done this to?" Rick swallowed hard. "Sir, No." Malcolm's voice was sharp, cutting off any excuse before it could leave Rick's mouth. "Do not lie to me." Rick's face flushed with panic. He glanced around the dealership as if searching for a lifeline. No one came to his defense. Then, movement. The head of security, a tall man in a navy blue suit, stepped forward. He held up a tablet. Security footage. "Mr. Grayson," he said, clearing his throat. "I pulled the last few weeks of footage, as per your request." Rick visibly tensed. Malcolm nodded. "Play it." The security officer pressed play. On the screen, a pattern emerged. Rick, smirking as he dismissed a black couple. Rick, rolling his eyes as a Hispanic man asked about financing options. Rick, ignoring customers who did not fit his ideal buyer. The room watched in disgust. Customers murmured in shock. Employees looked away in shame. "Rick?" Rick turned pale. "This is," he stammered. "This is not what it looks like." Malcolm raised an eyebrow. "So, the camera is lying?" he asked, voice dripping with sarcasm. Rick had no answer. Malcolm let out a slow breath, shaking his head. "I built this company on trust," he said, his voice carrying through the showroom. "On respect, on treating every customer with dignity, no matter what they look like." Rick opened his mouth. Malcolm held up a hand. "You had 3 years here, Rick. 3 years to do your job right. And instead you spent it deciding who was worthy of buying a car?" Rick's hands started shaking. "Sir, please!" "No." The finality in Malcolm's voice hit like a hammer. "Rick, you are fired. Effective immediately." The room erupted in gasps. Rick staggered backward. You cannot do that! Malcolm tilted his head. I own this place. I can do whatever I want. Rick desperately turned to Mr. Thompson. Please, tell him. I was your best salesman. Mr. Thompson took a step back, shaking his head. You were. Now you are just another guy who lost his job for being a racist. Rick froze. His arrogance, gone. His power, stripped. His future at Grayson Auto, dead. Malcolm turned to security. Escort him out. 2 security officers stepped forward. Rick panicked. Wait! I will do better, I swear. Malcolm's expression did not change. You are done, Rick. Rick tried one last time. Please, sir. But Malcolm? Malcolm had already turned his back. And just like that, Rick Marshall's career was over. The dealership is silent. The tension in the air is thick, almost suffocating. Rick is gone. His arrogance escorted out the door. But Malcolm? Malcolm is just getting started. He turns to James, who still looks stunned, his eyes flickering between Malcolm and the keys in his hand. Keys are yours, Malcolm says, holding them out. James blinks. What? No payments, no catches. This truck? It is yours now. James stares. He looks at the keys, then back at Malcolm. His hands shake. Sir, I cannot accept this. Malcolm raises an eyebrow. You already did. James takes a deep breath, slowly reaching out. His fingers close around the keys, gripping them like they might disappear. The dealership watches. The other customers stare in disbelief. The employees whisper. The customers murmur in shock. This is history being made. James exhales sharply, still in disbelief. I do not even know what to say. Malcolm claps a firm hand on his shoulder. Then do not say anything. Just drive. James lets out a shaky laugh, his eyes wide. For the first time since stepping into this dealership, he feels seen, respected, equal. Malcolm turns away, scanning the staff. Some look ashamed, others look nervous. But all of them know things are about to change. This business, Malcolm says, his voice steady, controlled, powerful, was built to treat all customers with respect. The employees stand straighter. That starts today. A few nod. Others shift uncomfortably. They know their days of discrimination are over. The silence is deafening. No one dares to speak. No one dares to question him. Then, from the back, a slow clap. One of the younger employees steps forward, clapping louder. Then another, and another. Soon, the entire dealership is applauding. James looks around, blinking fast, overwhelmed. Even the manager, Mr. Thompson, is nodding. You are right, sir. This place needed a wake-up call. Malcolm exhales, satisfied. But before he leaves, he locks eyes with the staff one last time. Remember today, he says. Because this is how we do business now. He hands James the keys, firmly shakes his hand, and walks out like a boss. And just like that, Grayson Auto Sales will never be the same again.